All right, so we'll start tonight by giving you guys an opportunity to ask questions about things that weren't necessarily clear from the rubric or the outline. Do we have any? Nothing burning? That's good.
Sorry, Scott. You said, like, if we chose week 10 to give our presentation, then we should do it in week 10, right? Or we can do it earlier.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
Mm-hmm. With a small class like this, we can just schedule it whenever it's convenient for people.
Okay, sure.
We'll kind of stay online we'll do a little bit of a discussion each week, maybe 20 minutes on the topic for each week, just so just talk about it. But in terms of the presentations, we'll put them wherever suits you.
Okay.
Yeah. Again, the advantage of small classes. Sorry?
You were saying it's probably good to get in a bit earlier, so you've got more time to take in the feedback, yeah?
Yeah. And I will turn them around I will promise to turn them around in 2 weeks as usual, but I will try to turn them around much more quickly because it's a small class. But some of the things I'll have to take some time to think and research and look stuff up as well.
Okay, no worries.
One of the things that's interesting about, and I think someone mentions in the forums or at least in an email, one of the things when you move into these type of topics is suddenly the field of things you have to know becomes incredibly wide, and it's a different kind of knowledge than we generally think about when we think about law, because law tends to be very much, and this is one of the weaknesses of the way sort of the English Australian legal education tradition has been founded. It's been basically learn everything there is to know about torts. Now, in the 1950s, when everything to know about torts was only, a book this thick, and you only worked within one jurisdiction, the idea of, maybe going and suing someone in New South Wales when you lived in Queensland was a big deal. And if you were living in New South Wales, you couldn't sue people in Queensland because there was the dingo fence, and, New South Wales barristers weren't allowed to practice in Queensland and all those kind of weird things. So that when the world was really small and really closed, you could teach and learn law in this kind of all-encompassing way where you get all the important cases, all the important legislation, although back then no one cared about legislation, and it'd all be in one place and you'd memorise it all and you'd let it go in an exam and therefore you'd master the area. Well, now, law, just the amount of law in one jurisdiction has grown massively. We're now interjurisdictional. Australia, has, you can't, and you guys, I guess, are a key example of the fact that you can't just be a one state lawyer anymore. We're from all over the place. And more so than that, you need to be international. You need to be able to move flexibly in international contexts. And there's some really interesting critiques of English lawyers coming out of the European Union, because they're saying that English lawyers know English law, but they flounder terribly as soon as they have to work across multiple jurisdictions. Because, again, they're taught in this way where it's like you take all the law from England, because that's all that's important, and everything else in the world is foreign law, and you don't worry about that unless it becomes a problem. Whereas European lawyers are trained to be, move across jurisdictions, because geography means you'll be moving and working across borders a lot more often. Anyway, long story short, we're generating a new way of thinking about law that's broader and flatter, but you then have to have the expertise to drill down very quickly and look at something in detail. And this has informed the design of the assessment in this course, which may look like it was a haphazard accident, but it was actually, there was a design principle involved. And that was that for something like e-law, we should all have a broad appreciation of what the big themes and issues are. But we also need the capacity to take one particular issue and drill down really deeply and to actually be able to find out in detail the important parts of that. So given that philosophy, it was kind of silly to then say, well, we're going to set what the important topics are and have an exam on them. I mean, I'm a big fan of exams at the best of times. But it was kind of silly to try and, not have an assessment that replicated the way the world worked. So, yes, there are people who are specialists in, say, software licensing, and there are people who are specialists in social media and all those sorts of things. But everyone who's working in this field needs to be kind of have a little bit of everything. And that's the way legal practice is changing generally, I think. The general specific balance is changing quite a lot. Of course, when you do have specific knowledge, you become very, very valuable in that field, but less valuable outside that field. And I know someone I used to teach with had a lot of incredibly in-depth knowledge of one section of the tax legislation, and he'd written dozens of articles on this. And guess what happened? They changed the law and they repealed those sections. And suddenly this guy's expertise went from being one of, the national Australia leaders on taxation law to being one of the national leaders on what taxation law used to be. And that's not a good way to be. Anyway, so yeah, this point was brought up in one of the discussions I've been having recently, and I can't remember where, that in e-law you need to know a little bit about everything, and you need to be able to have that constant feed. You have to have, an awareness of things that are occurring. And I think part of that, a really important part of that, is being open to the fact that you won't know everything. So when someone says, as we just did before, they've heard Foxtel is following up on the Dallas Buyers Club. As an academic, I should be saying, oh yes, I know all about that because I'm the expert. But that's kind of a crazy way to be. I didn't know about that. So you need to be open to when people raise things and go, okay, that's interesting. I'll connect that piece of knowledge back in. Anyway, that's a piece of learning philosophy, I guess. But I hope it helps you understand where I'm coming from with the design of this and why it doesn't necessarily look the same as you necessarily expect a law assessment to look. Okay, so that's a very general intro. So it seems that everyone's kind of happy with the style, and I think part of it is that you also trust that I am not going to ambush you along the way by saying I'm marking you down because you didn't do this. And that's important, that I've set out in the rubrics what I'm looking for, and I'm not going to pull something out of my hat and say, oh, by the way, if you're writing for a wiki, you have to always use 16-point headings, and you haven't used 16-point headings, so I'm marking you down for that. I know, not in our school, I'm sure, I hope none of my colleagues do that, but I know people have had bad academic experiences with things where they're told to write a business report or something, and then, the lecturer has in their mind a very, very specific idea of what they think a report would look like, and they don't communicate that, and people don't know what they're looking for. So I will be, if you do think I'm doing that, please tell me, and we'll talk about it. All right. So does anyone have a particular week they want to get in really quickly on snagging a workshop, or would you rather do it through the forums?
I think I nominated week 8 or 9. I don't know.
Yeah, I nominated week 10. I think it was the criminal. Digital crime, that was it.
I have week 11, and I'd be quite happy to do it earlier than week 11.
Yeah, and I nominated week 4, so obviously I wasn't able to have it ready pending the rubrics. So, yeah, I'm happy to get it done in the next couple of weeks, whenever suits. mine's a bit of an amalgamation of probably week 4 and 5 anyway. So. Scott, are you still muted?
I am still muted. Just why everyone's looking really confused. Okay. For those of you who aren't lip readers, and why aren't you? Well, haven't you practiced your lip reading? I've put Jessica down for week 6. I've put Brendan down for week 10. Now, Sam was looking at 8 or 9. Do you have a preference?
It's the digital identity.
Yeah, you can put it whatever week. You can do it whatever week you want to do it. It's more about when you.
Oh,
yeah.
Whatever. Happy for you to nominate a week, and I'll just do it.
Okay, let's do it 8. That'll give you more time to write it up because you'll have all other assignments and things due. So
I'm pretty ahead this term. Kind of managed to overlap 2 subjects with the same assignment.
Don't tell me that.
What?
There's this weird. I should probably mute this or stop recording. There's this weird CQ thing where they talk about self-plagiarism, and they're trying to punish people who they claim have plagiarised themselves because they've used work from previous assignments. And they're expecting me as a deputy dean to follow up on this heinous behaviour. And I'm saying, if we're setting essays that people can hand in the same essay for 2 different assessments, it says a lot more about us than it does about the students. And if it's the same topic, why can't they just hand the same thing in?
Oh, that's not what I'm saying or implying whatsoever.
No, but you're saying you've got you've got topics that you research.
Similar topics, yeah. So the research overlaps. So it's just writing up a new paper.
Yeah.
Again, completely original material.
And honestly, as someone who is a professional researcher, if I ran all my publications through Turnitin, I would find a lot of similarity between the things I write. Turnitin would pick up a lot of what they call self-plagiarism here on my work. So I don't think I can sit in the glass house on that one. Anyway, so Shelley, did you have a week that you wanted to nominate for your presentation?
What's left?
Okay, what have we got? We've got 9. We've got 7. I mean, we could have 2 on at the same week, but
I'd prefer to do it 9 over 7.
Yep, that's cool. Like I said, it doesn't matter where it fits into the workshop topics, really. With a small number like this, it's more about where it fits better for you guys. It's so rare that we have a small class like this that we can take advantage of it. The dean will be yelling at me because I'm not teaching enough students. But
can I just clarify something?
Yeah.
The written presentation is due the day that you do your oral presentation?
Let's say 2 weeks afterwards. But if you hand it in earlier, it's the same thing. It's like I will only start. It's only really going to be a problem if it's later than 2 weeks. However, if it's earlier, and you probably want time because we'll be talking about stuff in class. There'll be extra ideas you want to include. So you'll probably want to change a few things. But again, the earlier you can get it to me, the more feedback I can give you, and the sooner I can get feedback, then you can get into finishing it.
Okay, thanks.
Is the written presentation, what confused me about it was is it written as in like a submission, or is it written online as a wiki?
Written as a submission. you might want to
Yeah.
start putting some. If I can get the wiki up and running, which I know has been a slow process, but I'm no longer acting head of the law program, which is a fantastic thing. And I will have more time. And particularly with that email that went out, which was timed while Stephen was away, although Stephen came back to help deal with it. But yes, that was very much not appreciated in my trying to keep the boat steady while the boss is away. And then we get that ridiculous email.
I'll ask you about that when the recording stops.
Yeah, good idea.
Must not have any evidence, Professor.
Yes, we'll finish up a couple of minutes early tonight for anyone who wants to more information on that particular topic. Anyway, so yeah, I have been distracted by other duties in the last couple of weeks. Any case, but look, the wiki thing should be quite easy. It should be pretty seamless. But in terms of what you're submitting to me, yeah, in print, so I can sort of note it up with comments and things, particularly because there's possibly a way I could note it up in the wiki, and we could probably use the wiki format, and we could do the comments below the line and everything else. But we'd all have to be a lot more confident with the technology. I would have to be more confident with the technology to do that in a marking context. So let's do it as a print format. Yeah, I think I put in the rubric some of the things I wanted to talk about. Anyway, and that's not a by any means an exclusive list. If there are other things you think are important to go in that proposal, that was just what I thought I would put in there. But I'm quite open to the fact that you might have better ideas about the sorts of things you might want to say. And again, reinforcing that this is a new writing skill. It's a new writing task. I mean, it's a new skill globally. Although I did see Wikipedia has been around. It's about to have its 20th birthday, which is very, very frightening for someone old like me. But we've had a few hundred years of how to write an essay, at least a couple of hundred years of writing essays. We've only had 20 years of writing for a wiki, we need to. We are evolving that skill set as we go. And I think one of the important things, and we talked about this last week maybe, but one of the important things is what we're creating is an academic piece, and Wikipedia is not academic. And what that means is Wikipedia as an encyclopedia very carefully doesn't include opinion. And you can imagine it's contentious enough as it is. Can you imagine how contentious it would be if you let people put their opinions in there? Whereas when we're writing something that is includes opinion. So it'll include, discussions of where you think the law might be going, or, the areas that are deficient that might need law reform, or areas that are challenged. And of course, as usual, with like an academic piece, you're backing that up with reference to, what other authors have said and other commentary and whatever. It's not just you kind of making it up as you go along, but it's different. It'll look different to what Wikipedia looks like, and hopefully look a bit more like what a textbook should look like. And I just did a paper actually at the Law Teachers Association where I argued that the textbooks of the future are going to be wikis, and they're going to be wikis that are going to be designed by groups collectively rather than written by individual academics. So we're pioneering the way here. Anyway, okay, what else was I going to talk about tonight? Oh yeah, digitalization and virtualization as concepts. They're linked and connected, of course, but they're sort of important themes in the course and in the selection of readings that I've picked. So the online materials that Stephen's written are basically the textbook for this course. There's a whole lot of, you've seen it by now, there's a whole lot of material there. We just finished editing the last weeks 8 to 11 today, so the editor should get them back to me this week, hopefully, and I can upload the rest of those there. But as you can see, this is basically the size of a textbook, that material. But the readings for each week, I've carefully picked them to be thematically linked and to sort of tell a connected thematic story around these ideas of digitalization, virtualization. And these themes become more important as they become more everyday, because back when I first started teaching e-law or cyber law or whatever, virtual and digital were new. There were these incredibly new concepts, and they were out there and they were mad, and people had seen The Matrix and they thought maybe it had something to do with The Matrix. God, The Matrix is like 15 years old. That's really scary as well. I'm soon going to have students who are younger than The Matrix. Anyway, so at that time, around the turn of the millennium, these things were really new and they're really exciting, and people thought that, everyone was going to have kung fu powers and talk like Keanu Reeves. But now they've become ingrained and they've become something that's more everyday. You sort of lose track of what the world was like before these things. So when I talk about digitalization, we're talking about digital media, which is computer media. And this only makes sense when you think about the time, not necessarily before computers, but before the internet and before computer media was widespread in society. So not so long ago, computers were not very common. When I went to uni, only a handful of people had computers. Most people used typewriters to type their assignments. Gee, that was fun. Or they handwrote assignments, which must have been fun for the lecturers. And only sort of the seriously geeky had personal computers. And of course, there was no internet, so there was no kind of mass connectivity. If you were really, really out there, you might have a dial-up connection to a bulletin board or something like that, which were very dangerous and exciting places. But there was no common everyday internet either. So media was analog; it was non-digital. If you went and bought a record, it was a physical piece of vinyl with physical grooves cut into it. And then, of course, CDs were kind of in between, because CDs kind of worked on computer technology, but they didn't look like computer technology because you had to have a CD player to put them in, which was a specific piece of kit that you used. And it was a little later that people figured out that you could put a CD player in a computer and then you could start ripping the music from a CD. So it didn't mean you couldn't copy music, because tape players were around and people always had ways of copying music. Things were broadcast on TV. People had piles and piles of video cassettes they recorded. But once something was recorded, it was still very inert. So if someone had a TV show that you'd missed and you wanted to catch up on an episode of the TV show, you had to get like 2 VCRs and you'd wire them together and you'd play one and you'd record to the other to make a copy, or you'd lend someone a tape or whatever. But copying was done in an analog world in a very slow way. Same with books. Books have kind of, in some ways, resisted the move to the digital world. And that's been kind of problematic in itself. But one of the reasons, I guess, why media was slow to move into the digital world was the security protections around copying suited publishers. So it suited publishers that if you recorded a record onto a tape, your tape hissed, and it was an inferior quality thing. And basically, if you wanted a really good copy of a record, you went and bought another copy of the record, or you bought a second-hand copy, which the publishers never really liked the idea of a second-hand markup, but there wasn't much they could do about it. If you wanted to copy a book, you were photocopying pages after pages, and this is what people did when I was at uni for textbooks and things. They'd borrow it from the library and they sat there and just photocopied the things, because it ended up cheaper, surprisingly enough. All right. So what digital media meant was that you could copy things very easily, and what the internet then meant was you had a medium for sending these files back and forth. So it was quite a radical thing when you could take a song or a movie or a book that existed only in the computer, make a copy of it onto a disk, Again, another kind of vaguely dead piece of technology. Recorded it onto a magnetic disc, you gave it to someone else, and suddenly there was a copy. Internet came along, and suddenly you could email it to someone, you could post it on a website, suddenly multiple copies could be made. Now, this has, of course, had a dramatic impact on intellectual property law, and has certainly changed the financial interests and the way particular financial interests are protected. However, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Again, if we go back to the 1980s when the VCR technology ruled the movie world, you only had a handful of movies released on VCR each year. And in the bad old days, they cost about $120 to buy a movie, which seems kind of implausible now, but it did. And that's why we had video libraries, because video libraries would buy stock of them. People would hire them out because people weren't going to pay $120. And sometimes it was like $10 for a new release movie for an overnight. It's quite ridiculous. TV series fared even worse because you could only fit sort of 2 episodes on a tape. Some of those were available commercially, but they tended to be about $30 for 2 episodes. So if you wanted to buy a whole series, that was about 30 tapes. It was about $300 or something to get a TV series, and it was, came in a box this big, and not they came in a box, but they fit on a shelf sort of this big, and of course videotape rots over time. So all those people who spent hundreds and hundreds of dollars on TV series have now got mush sitting on their shelves if they haven't replaced them with digital versions. Where we're going with this, well, the economy around production of these media changed. You didn't have a JB Hi-Fi back then. Well, you did have JB Hi-Fi back then, but they sold records and then CDs. JB Hi-Fi only sold movies very, very recently and TV shows. So because the market changed and digitalisation meant that producers were forced to produce things at a cheaper price point, what actually happened was their market expanded dramatically. So rather than selling a small number of these $120 videotapes that were kind of expensive to make copies of, and they rotted and you had to ship them around and they were really heavy, they suddenly, today you can buy a new release movie for $30 and, slightly older movies for much, much less. What that changes meant was their market expanded dramatically. Yourselves the size of a JB Hi-Fi these days and the amount of stuff there is in there. So are they making less money? Well, they're still making movies. They're not making movies or TV series as a public service. They're making them because there's a commercial interest in it. What's happened is the commercial reality has changed around it. It's also meant that the things like broadcast used to be the core of everything because it was the only way we had to do things. With the internet, we've challenged that broadcast model, and because broadcasters were really slow at picking up on digital media, they basically lost a lot of their market share to either the direct home DVD sales or they lost it to piracy. And it was simply because they dragged their feet because they were not prepared to pick up and move their economic model. I was at a meeting with, I won't tell you which TV channel, I probably shouldn't tell you which TV channel, but it was a group of channel executives, one of the major commercial TV networks. And they'd asked some academics to come in and give advice on, the new digital landscape. But their result, this was 2001, 2002, so internet was in full flight by this point. But they decided at the end of the day that the internet was a passing fad, that what people would come back for was good quality homegrown content, and that they weren't really going to worry about the digital media or digital television because that was just a passing fad. So this was a major TV company, and these were people who were well-paid executives who were so switched off to what was going on. So as a result, I mean, we still have broadcast TV, but they're broadcasting the cheapest things they can make, which is reality programs, cooking programs, building programs, because that's the only local content that they can afford to create. And they need to create local content or they'll lose their broadcasting license. If they don't have their broadcasting license, they can't broadcast the sport, which is the only thing that they're going to make money out of. And yeah, and getting to the point that Sam said earlier, Netflix is now changing the model again. And Netflix is providing this idea of an online library that may even change what JB Hi-Fi is doing. And I know a few people have been saying, well, if I can just watch it all on Netflix whenever I like, why would I buy the DVDs now? The quality is pretty good. I mean, it's not as good as a Blu-ray, but it's pretty good quality. Why would I buy them? And apart from the fact that Netflix changes its content, and that's, you know, if you did want something that you're going to be able to watch over time, there's probably still is a role for purchasable hard copy film and TV on DVD or Blu-ray. Yeah, I think that what's been forced is a change to the market, and the change to the market has grown and expanded the market. And there's a lot of hand-wringing that goes on with the intellectual property interest groups because, you know, they just want constantly tougher laws. They want more penalties. They want to scare people more. I was a criminologist for a few years, and one of the things you learn from criminology is nothing scares people in terms of punishment. In fact, you can give people the death penalty, and that actually doesn't decrease rates of offence. Well, it decreases rates of offence for that specific individual, obviously, but it doesn't decrease the rates of offence generally. In fact, in terms of violent crime, you have the death penalty. You have more violent crime where you have the death penalty, so go figure. So the idea of a deterrent doesn't really work. That's, you know, what years in criminology taught me. Maybe not a whole lot else. So it's about evolving new markets, and I guess it's important that they try and hang on to as many of the IP rights and protection that they can. But the other thing, and this is, I guess, a little bit of a segue into the second topic of virtualization, is the ease of production of digital media has also changed the market in terms of who can produce media. So YouTube is, again, something else which is fundamentally and completely changed the media landscape. Because a lot of the stuff that you would ordinarily go to a commercial source for, or it didn't even exist as a commercial source, but you might ordinarily go to a commercial source for, are available through YouTube as podcasts. Not in every field, obviously, but particularly in sort of the geek fields. There are, we increasingly, people are immersed in gaming worlds, and games are more and more important to each generation as they come along. All the important media is all YouTube podcasts these days. There are a few magazines still around, and they seem, Game Informer still seems to be selling relatively well, but all the information is all online. The whole community is there. I don't know whether ballet appreciation, for example, has moved into the podcasting space, and I don't want to be snobby about it because it may have. There may be. We can't, until you actually look at these subcultures, you can't really see necessarily. You can't predict which ones are going to take on this sort of virtual life. But that's also not only changed the way in which media is produced and the economic foundations of it, also changes the regulatory space quite significantly, because suddenly identity, and here we come back to this week's reading, after going the scenic route around it, identity becomes really important commercially and legally, and your ability to maintain your identity and your brand becomes very vital for YouTubers to be able to sell advertising and make money. It becomes important to people who, even if they're not big in terms of YouTube advertising, maybe using systems like Patreon. And Patreon's kind of, if you haven't seen it, sort of like a sponsorship subscription system where you can say someone you like who produces podcasts and digital media, you can pay them $5 a month to keep doing it. and they might provide you with bonus content or whatever as well. Who knows? They may or may not. But basically, the idea is you pay a small micro fee to someone who's producing the media, so they can do more of it. They don't have to work as a waiter or whatever to make ends meet. And because, if 5,000 people pay you $5 a month, that money starts adding up pretty quickly. Even if only 500 people pay you $5 a month, that's still, significant money if you're someone who's a struggling YouTuber. Okay, so the virtual world becomes important. Virtual identity becomes important, and it starts to become unpicked from real identity. We made some decisions really early on with the internet that we can't go back on, where, there could have been a decision to have an internet identity card where everyone on the internet had to use an internet identity, and it had to be verified by, say, a credit card check or a government license or something, and therefore everything you did online, you had to log in with like your driver's license or your credit card, and you could track who everyone was in every format. The designers of the internet made it an open structure, and the readings from Lessig talks about this a bit as well. And we've benefited from that open structure. But from a regulatory point of view, it's also left us with some quandaries. In the early days of the internet, people said, remember the Matrix was new back then. This is great because the fascist governments of the world can't track us. They can't stop us doing what we want to do. We're all free. The internet is this great place of freedom. Problem was, as things are going on, we're finding out that freedom isn't the same for everyone, and there are all sorts of bad behaviours that are occurring online. And I don't know if you guys are aware of the Gamergate situation, but there's huge controversy and lots of sort of politics about it, and the Wikipedia entry changes all the time. But basically, it's an anti-woman hate group who claim that women are destroying games for men. And they use this virtual identity thing as a way of hitting out at individuals in a really, really vicious way. And they do things like swatting, although it's never been this, we never proved that any individuals from the Gamergate group are doing this, but we know they are, where you call in a SWAT team on someone's house, and you call the police and say, you say there's evidence of something, and you call them in. Doxing, where you hack into someone's identity and you put all the documents online with things like their home addresses and things and their phone numbers, so then all your horrible, nasty little cronies can ring their parents and swear and abuse their parents and their partners and their children and all sorts of things. So Gamergate only sort of erupted last year or the year before, and what it's really shown is that the shield of virtual identity, which we first thought was a great thing for freedom and a great thing for liberty, has actually become a hiding point for a whole lot of really, really bad behaviours. And we're now looking at how the code of the internet might start to be changed in a way that will protect people. And one way of doing this is the safe harbours idea. So rather than banning people, and of course with virtual identity, every time you ban someone, they just create another identity. There's this idea of being able to generate karma. So if you behave well, your virtual identity, no matter who you actually are behind that virtual identity gains prestige. You behave badly, you lose prestige from that particular identity. What that could conceivably mean is that you might decide to, when you're looking at YouTube, to only be able to view the comments of people who have a positive karma. Now, some people will say this is an attack on free speech, blah, 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 blah. But given how abusive and horrible people are in YouTube comments, there's a certain, and YouTube are looking at hard coding this in, that you can elect. You can say, okay, I want to see all the idiots. I want to see all the horrible people who say vile things about people's children's videos. Or I'm only going to look at the comments from people who have, positive karma, people who behave well. And people will continue to behave well because they risk losing that karma if they do the wrong thing. So this is a way of digitally encoding behaviour around identity that is not the punitive way. We know the punitive way doesn't work. We know banning people from YouTube doesn't work. They pop up again, they get another email address, they pop up with another alias. But if we can actually reward good behaviour, then we can actually filter for good behaviour. We can actually create an internet that we only see the good behaviour, and we can let everyone else run off to 4chan or wherever they do those terrible things. So that's only one example. And I guess what I wanted to get across was that idea that, you know, the digitization of media has created a different world, and it's created its own regulatory problems. Virtualization has also created its own problems, but these two things might actually start creating solutions. At the moment, we hire quite often, I mean, using automated services to filter content doesn't work terribly well. We try and do that. But I know Facebook, for instance, there was an article in Wired where they mentioned they hire a lot of people just to sit down and take pictures of beheadings and child pornography off of Facebook. And that's what they do all day, which I think has to be one of the worst jobs, not the worst jobs I can think of, but it certainly is a pretty horrible job to just sit down and look at disgusting things people have posted on Facebook, remove them from Facebook so no one else can see them, ban the person who posted them, and carry on. I know a lot of people are pretty angry when they have things that they've posted on Facebook reported, and less than happy sometimes with the mediation process that goes on. And every time Facebook does something, everyone goes, I hate Facebook. I can't leave Facebook, but I hate it. But these are important regulatory issues, and they're important financial issues as well. So if you own something like Facebook as a corporation, or as a shareholders, or as an individual who created or whatever, you risk everything if you let the idiots take over. Because what will happen is everyone else will leave. So if they do probably even slightly less to control Facebook, and it becomes swamped with porn, what they'll find is a whole lot of people will just leave. And as soon as a critical mass of people, and the article on identity talks about this too, in terms of the critical mass in networks, as soon as a critical mass leaves, you end up with MySpace. Anyone remember MySpace? It was bigger than Facebook at some point, but for whatever reason, it died. So the regulatory and economic issues go together, and it becomes in the interests of the commercial providers to self-regulate if they want to continue to exist. So that's an interesting thing as well, and that's where things like terms of service and those virtual contracts become just as important as legislation for us to look at. Anyway, that's been a long rambling rant. Questions? We are hitting wind down time, so and it's freezing cold here in Melbourne, so I want to go and sit in front of the heater. So yeah, we can. I mean, if there's any other quick discussions, we can keep them going during the week. I'll stop recording now.